Alright, so number one, they want you to find all the zeros, and when I have a four-termed polynomial, I always try to see if it factors by grouping, so that's why you see this set up like this in a 2x2 grid. So I check, what's the greatest common factor here? That's going to be t cubed, and then t cubed times something gives me 2t to the fourth, so that would be 2t. And then t cubed times -1 gives me -3t cubed. And then on the bottom left, 2t times 8 gives me 16t. And I always check, is 8 times sorry, I messed up right here. Sorry, -3. There you go. 2t cubed times -3 gives me -3t cubed. And so as I was saying, I check here. 8 times -3 gives me -24, so that means it works. So my factors are 2t minus 3 and t cubed plus 8. Now right here, this is a sum of cubes. And you guys, I gave you the formula a couple weeks back, and I told you to make a note of it, put it in your index so that you could refer back to it whenever you need it. So we're going to use the factoring of sum of two cubes to break this up further, and this is what you get. Okay, so t cubed plus 8 becomes this. Now this factor right here gives you imaginary numbers. It doesn't factor anymore, so we're going to have to use quadratic formula. So it's going to be t is -b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so that gives you 2 plus or minus square root of 4 minus 16 is -12 over 2. Now we know 12 is 4 times 3, so the 4 is a square. It comes out as a 2. So we end up with 2 plus or minus 2, and then the negative here is I. The 3 is stuck inside, that didn't come out, over 2. And I can reduce by 2 by factoring out a 2 in the numerator over 2, and then the 2 over 2 is a 1. Okay, it cancels out. So the zeros are 3/2, and that's from this factor right here, and then -2 from this factor right here, and 1 plus or minus I radical 2 from the quadratic formula. Okay, for number 2 I set it up the same way because it's 4 terms. So in the first row I can factor out a t to the 4th, then 3t times t to the 4th is 3t to the 5th, and then 2 times t to the 4th is 2t to the 4th, and then minus 1. And then again I check, is -1 times 2 equal to -2? Yes. So that means it's factored correctly. So the factors are 3t plus 2, and then t to the 4th minus 1. So I can factor the difference of two squares here. So just bring down 3t plus 2, and then t squared plus 1, t squared minus 1. Here I have another difference of squares. T plus 1, t minus 1. Okay, so now we're going to find the zeros. The linear factors, these three, are easy to just by observation we can get the zeros. This one, it's quadratic, so I'm going to set it up equal to 0 and solve. I mean, I could do that with the other three too, but you really don't have to. You can just look at the factor and you know what the zero is. But if you don't see it, if it's not as obvious to you, you can set up each factor equal to 0 like I'm doing with this one and solve. So here, so this is t equals plus or minus I. Okay, so the zeros are negative 2/3 plus minus I and plus minus 1. Okay, from these two over here, plus minus 1. And those are the zeros. Okay, here's another 4-termed polynomial, so I set it up the same way as the other two. Oops, I forgot a square here. So I can factor x squared from the first row. This would be x, this would be negative 8, and then here I have 22. So you can see right away that 22 times negative 8 does not equal negative 20, right? So that just tells you this method did not work here. So now we're going to have to do the p over q. Fortunately for us, the leading coefficient is 1. A is 1. So that means q is plus or minus 1. So we just have to focus on the p factors, which are these right here. So it's going to be plus minus 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, and 20. Okay? We'll start off with 1 and we use synthetic division. Bring down the 1. And we can see right off it's not going to work. Try 2. Bring down the 1. Negative 6, negative 12, 10, and this one works. We got a remainder of 0, so that means that this is a factor. And so is this. This is x squared minus 6x plus 10, and that does not factor. So we have to use quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So that's 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 over 2. Now square root of 4 is 2 and the square root of negative 1 is I. So this one becomes 2i. So 6 plus or minus 2i over 2. Factor out a 2. And you get that 3 plus or minus I. So the zeros are 2, because remember we got that from here. And then 3 plus or minus I. Okay, so number 4 is difference of squares. So it's going to be 9t squared minus 1 times 9t squared plus 1. And again, we have another difference of squares right here. So it's 3t plus 1, 3t minus 1. And you could factor this one too as 3t plus I and 3t minus I, if you'd like, or if you just want to go ahead and set it equal to 0 like I did in the previous problem, that's fine too. So that would give you this, divide by 9, and then take the square root. Okay, so that's going to give you plus or minus 1/3 I. So the zeros from these two, plus or minus 1/3, and from these two, plus or minus 1/3 I. Because remember, you're looking for all the zeros, real and imaginary. Alright, for number 5, you can pick any two factors and multiply them together. I will multiply these two first, and so I'll just bring down the 5i. So that's going to give me 12 plus 27i. I'm just using distributive property, minus 8i minus 18i squared. So again, keep the 5i. This is actually plus 18, so that's going to give me 30, and then plus 19i. Now I'm going to distribute the 5i, so that's going to give me 150i plus 95i squared. Okay, now it's not done yet, you have to still simplify, so 95i squared gives you the negative 95. And to write it in standard form, the real part comes first and then the imaginary. For number 6, I'm going to first get rid of the parentheses by distributing the negative I, or the negative. So negative 4 minus I. Combine like terms, so this one with this one gives me 2, and this one with this one gives me I. That's it. For number 7, the first thing I'm going to do is simplify the square root of negative numbers and put it as 5i. That's the square root of negative 25. And then the other one would be plus I, square root of negative 1. And so now I just use distributive property. So 6 plus 3i minus 10i minus 5i squared. Again, remember this is actually plus 5. So 6 plus 5 is 11. And then these two right here minus 7i. Alright, so number 8 is very much like number 5. So I'm going to do the two binomials first. So I'll bring down the negative 3i. So that's 20 plus 8i plus 5i plus 2i squared. So this is a negative 2. So I'm going to have 20 minus 2 is 18. And then these two give you 13i. Now I'm going to distribute the negative 3i, so I get negative, what is it, 24, 54i minus 39i squared. So remember, negative 39i squared is actually positive 39, and then we just stick the imaginary part at the end. Alright, so number 9 is squaring two binomials and then combining like terms. So for this one right here, it's 4 minus, so you multiply 5 and 2 and double it, minus 20i, and then square the last term, it's plus 25i squared. Okay, minus, I'll put parentheses there because I'm just squaring first. So that's going to be 9 plus, and then this is 21, but you double it, 42. And then 7i squared, so that's going to be 49i squared. Okay, let me just go ahead and bring this down. There's several ways of simplifying this. I'm just going to do the distribute the negative first, like this. Okay, so I know that this is actually negative 25. And this is positive 49. So I've got 4 minus 25 minus 9 plus 49. So I'm going to combine those four numbers together. And I get, let's see, positive, that's 19. So I get 19. And then I have this imaginary and this imaginary, so that's negative 62i. That's it. So when you divide, you multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. So the conjugate of the denominator would be 3 minus 2i. And it has, this fraction here has to equal 1. Okay? That's why it's the same top and bottom. Distributive property, 27 minus 18i minus 9i plus 6i squared. Denominator, 9. You can distribute on the bottom too, but you'll see right away that the i's cancel out. And then minus 4i squared. So this is gone, this is 0. This is actually negative 6, and this is positive 4. So you're going to end up with 27 minus 6, that's going to be 21, minus 27i over 9 plus 4, 13. Separated because that's standard form, like this, because they're asking for the answer in standard form.